I can still feel the burn in my chest from the moment he slid that document across the desk. No eye contact, no explanation. Just a quiet little shove that told me exactly how disposable he thought I was. 7 years of carrying that place on my back, and he reduced me to a footnote in one meeting. I walked out holding more anger than I knew what to do with, and one truth he never saw coming. If you've ever faced something like this, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe if you want to hear the rest. I didn't realize how close I was to breaking until the morning everything finally snapped. For 7 years I showed up before anyone else, fixed whatever mess was waiting on my desk, and quietly saved projects my boss, Miles Thatcher, was too busy bragging about to understand. I wasn't a hero. I was just the person who cleaned up after everyone else. That was my mistake, thinking quiet competence would ever be enough in a place that rewarded noise. That day, I walked into the office with my usual coffee, mentally preparing myself for another round of damage control. The floor was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you stepped into the wrong building. People looked at me, then quickly looked away. That should have been my warning. Miles's assistant told me he wanted to see me immediately. Her voice sounded tight, like she already knew something I didn't. I walked down the hallway, the same hallway I'd walked thousands of times before, but something felt different, off, heavy. Miles was sitting behind his glass desk, scrolling on his phone like he couldn't be bothered to acknowledge my existence. Typical. He didn't even say good morning. He just tilted his chin at the chair across from him. Before I could even sit, he reached over and slid a folder across the sleek surface. No greeting, no context, just a push. And in that one gesture, I felt the first fracture form inside me. I opened it, expecting maybe contract updates, maybe a shift in responsibilities, maybe even recognition for the crisis I'd fixed the night before. Instead, I saw the word reassignment. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I blinked, read it again, and felt heat crawl up the back of my neck. My title had been removed. My responsibilities, the ones I had built from the ground up, were crossed out. And underneath, centered like it was some kind of promotion, was a single line. Effective immediately, Hannah will transition into workflow support under Junior Innovation Lead, Tyler Marks. Tyler, 24-year-old Tyler, the intern we hired last year because his uncle played golf with the board. The kid who once asked me if supply chain visibility meant turning on more lights in the warehouse. I stared at Miles, waiting for him to laugh, waiting for him to tell me this was some sick joke. But he leaned back in his leather chair with a smirk so faint it made my stomach turn. "This is a strategic restructuring," he said lazily. "New energy, new leadership. You'll be helping Tyler ramp up." Ramping up. He was demoting me to an assistant to a child who still couldn't send a complete email without asking me how to attach a file. I felt something deep inside me shift, a pressure that had been building for years finally beginning to crack. I had held entire departments together while Miles took victory laps. I had built client trust while he misquoted metrics in meetings. I had given this place every ounce of stability it had, and now I was being told I'd report to Tyler because Miles wanted someone younger, flashier, easier to control. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I just closed the folder and placed it back on his desk. That was the last moment he ever saw me as someone he could break, because something in me had already started quietly, dangerously waking up. I walked out of Miles's office feeling like my bones were vibrating. I'd been blindsided before. Unfair deadlines, emergency crisis calls at midnight, half-finished proposals dumped on my lap with an "I trust you to fix this." But nothing compared to being told I'd now answer to a kid who still used LOL in professional emails. I wasn't angry yet. Shock has a way of numbing everything for a moment. Like your brain needs time to accept that someone actually dared to disrespect you on a level you didn't think possible. But the numbness didn't last long. By the time I reached my desk, the humiliation settled over me like a heavy coat I couldn't take off. People were watching, pretending not to, but absolutely watching. You learn to read office silence after enough years in corporate America. I knew that look, the combination of guilt, curiosity, and relief that it wasn't happening to them. A few eyes darted away as I passed. Someone in the break room whispered, And then came the final blow. Tyler showed up at my desk, shirt slightly wrinkled, hair a mess, sneakers squeaking on the cheap carpet. He lifted a hand in a half wave, half high five he immediately seemed to regret. "Hey, Hannah," he said, voice cracking with the confidence of someone who wasn't sure if he should be excited or terrified. "Miles told me the news." I said nothing. He shifted awkwardly. So I guess you'll be showing me, like, everything." Everything. I almost laughed. Years of systems, vendor relationships, crisis management protocols, budgets, workflows, client expectations. Everything. I built a machine out of chaos, piece by piece, and he wanted me to hand over the keys like this was a school project. I kept my voice level. "What exactly did Miles tell you I'd be doing?" His face brightened, proud in a way that made my stomach twist. "That you'd train me to take over your department. Not support, not collaborate, take over." My jaw tightened for half a second before I forced it to relax. Do you want to start?" The kid shrugged. Now?" "Of course." I grabbed my laptop and followed him to a conference room with flickering lights and a table too small for actual collaboration. He sat down, spinning slightly in his chair, while I opened my files. He didn't notice the tremor in my hands, or maybe he did and assumed it was fear. I started explaining the basics, our scheduling system, our vendor logs, the escalation matrix, and after the first 10 minutes, his eyes glazed over. "This is a lot," he muttered. "Yeah," I said. "It is." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I mean, why didn't Miles just put you in charge? You know all this." A simple question, an innocent one, and yet it sliced deeper than anything Miles himself had said. "Because he could," I answered. I didn't tell him that men like Miles didn't value quiet competence. They valued people who mirrored their ego back at them. Tyler wasn't qualified, but he was male, young, and eager. He was malleable, the kind of person a weak leader keeps close so he can pretend he's strong. We went through 3 hours of training. 3 hours of me breaking down 7 years of structure for someone who kept forgetting what tab he'd clicked 5 seconds earlier. At one point, he asked if I could slow down. At another, he asked if we could skip the boring stuff. The boring stuff was what kept the company from collapsing. But sure, boring. When I finally dismissed him for the day, he stood up, stretched, and said, "Thanks, Hannah. I know this is weird for you, but, it'll work out." Then he gave me a thumbs up. A thumbs up. The humiliation was complete. Watching him walk away, I felt something shift. Something painful, necessary, and final. I realized Miles hadn't demoted me because I failed. He'd done it because he assumed I would accept it. Quietly, gratefully, without a fight. That was the last moment I let humiliation define me, because beneath the shame, something powerful was beginning to rise. My breaking point was becoming the edge of something I hadn't dared imagine, and none of them, Miles, Tyler, or anyone watching from the sidelines, had any idea what was coming. I drove home that night with my hands locked on the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't call anyone, didn't even let myself cry. I just kept replaying the same humiliating sentence in my mind. "You'll be training Tyler to take over your department." Until the words felt like they were carved into me. I walked into my apartment, dropped my bag on the floor, and sat in the dark for a long time. The kind of long where the silence starts to feel loud. That was when my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it. I was too drained to deal with another crisis or another apology email from someone who felt bad but wouldn't do a thing about it. But the buzzing kept going. Finally, I glanced at the screen, Serena Vale. I'd met her once, months ago, at a regional logistics panel. She'd been the only speaker who talked like she actually understood the work, not just the buzzwords. I remembered thinking she was sharp, maybe even intimidating in the kind of way that meant she expected people to rise to her level. Back then, she'd introduced herself after my Q&A contribution and said, "You see things clearly, I like that." I didn't think she remembered me, but here was her name lighting up my phone. Her message was simple. "Hannah, are you free this week? I've been following your work. I'd like to talk." I stared at that text, feeling something I hadn't felt all day, curiosity. I typed back before I could overthink it. I'm free tomorrow. She replied immediately, coffee, 10 a.m., no pressure. No pressure, 2 words I hadn't heard in years. The next morning, I walked into a small cafe on the riverfront, the kind of place that smelled like roasted beans and old wood, warm and grounding. Serena was already there, leaning over her laptop, dark hair pulled back, no blazer, no affectation, just someone who looked like she built things instead of pretending to. She stood when she saw me. Hannah, thanks for coming. Her handshake was firm, confident, the opposite of Miles's limp, let me show dominance by barely touching your hand style. We sat, and she got straight to the point. I've watched several of the projects you turned around. Quietly, I know your work more than you know. I blinked. How? She smiled. People talk, vendors talk, clients talk. You've built a reputation, whether your boss acknowledges it or not. My chest tightened. No one had ever said that to me. At least not out loud. She pushed her laptop toward me, a document open on the screen. This is a proposal for NorthBridge's next expansion phase. I need someone skilled, calm under pressure, and frankly, someone who knows how to make an operation run without drama. She paused. I want you. The words hit me harder than I expected. In what role? Leadership, she said. Real leadership, not behind-the-scenes cleanup. You'd have authority, budget, and a team you build from scratch. And equity. I don't offer that lightly. I swallowed hard. My brain wanted to protect itself, to say, I can't just leave. But my heart had already leapt forward. She studied me for a moment. I know that look, she said softly. You're too loyal for your own good. It was like she'd read a page from my life. Think about it, she added. But know this. You deserve a place where your work isn't treated like background noise. I walked out of that cafe feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. I wasn't ready to admit it yet, but the cracks inside me were starting to let in light. And the door Serena opened was one I could no longer pretend wasn't there. I told myself I needed time to think, but the truth was I was stalling. Not because Serena's offer wasn't everything I'd ever wanted, but because leaving felt like ripping out a part of myself I'd spent 7 years holding together. Loyalty is a strange thing. It grows roots in places that don't deserve it, and I'd let mine bury deep. So the next morning, I walked into the office pretending nothing had changed. I nodded at the receptionist, logged into my computer, organized my files. I even answered emails for Tyler, who had already forgotten half of what I taught him. I did all the familiar motions, but something inside me felt detached, almost like I was watching someone else go through the routine. It didn't take long before the cracks widened. That week, I worked late 3 nights in a row, not because I wanted to, but because of the disasters piling up around me. A vendor invoice that Miles had approved without actually reading. A client escalation that Tyler answered with a message so tone-deaf I thought it was a prank. A supply coordination spreadsheet that had been overwritten because someone didn't understand shared files. None of it was my fault, but all of it became my responsibility. As always, the worst part wasn't the mess. It was knowing that I'd been doing this for years without ever calling it what it was. Survival. I wasn't building anything. I was holding broken pieces together while other people took bows. And the more I saw it, the harder it was to unsee. On Wednesday night, I stayed past 10 trying to rewrite a shipment schedule that Tyler had managed to delete while experimenting with shortcuts. The office was empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like they were tired too. I sat there staring at the glowing screen, my hands cold, my head pounding, and I thought about Serena's words. You deserve a place where your work isn't treated like background noise. Background noise. That was exactly what I'd become here. A hum in the back that kept everything running while the people in front acted important. I was still staring at the mess when Miles barged into the office the next morning, wearing one of his performative frowns. Hannah, the board wants an updated status report, he announced, like I had any idea what he was talking about. A report on what? I asked. Everything, he said. Operations, vendor delays, client satisfaction, just whip something up. whip something up, as if a full analysis of half the company's workflow was something I could bake in an afternoon. "The meeting is in 2 hours," he added, "and I want it polished." I looked at him, waiting for the rest of the joke, but there was no joke. He really believed I could read his mind, fix every mistake, and polish it to perfection before lunch because that's what I'd always done. He had no idea what it cost me. I opened my laptop while he hovered behind me, pretending to supervise. "You need to move faster," he muttered. Faster. My pulse hammered. For a second, I imagined turning around and telling him exactly who he was and what he'd done to me. But I didn't. I just breathed slowly and kept typing. As he walked away, my phone buzzed, a message from Serena. "Checking in, no rush. Just want you to know the door is open." No pressure, no demands, no hovering, just respect. I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting the phone down. That message was a lifeline, and I wasn't ready to admit how much I needed it. That night, driving home, the truth hit me. Loyalty wasn't keeping me here anymore. Fear was. Fear of leaving. Fear of starting over. Fear that maybe Miles was right and I wasn't leadership material. But then I remembered the look in Serena's eyes, the kind that saw potential instead of utility. And for the first time, I wondered what my life might look like if I stopped surviving and finally started choosing myself. That question stayed with me long after the office lights faded behind me. I didn't plan to quit that night. I didn't drive home thinking, "This is it." I didn't feel brave or bold or empowered. I felt exhausted, down to the bone, the kind of exhaustion that makes you forget who you were before you started shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. But something inside me finally slipped out of place when I got home. I dropped my bag on the kitchen counter, kicked off my shoes, and stared at the wall like it was supposed to give me instructions. My laptop sat on the coffee table, screen still open from earlier. I walked toward it slowly, almost on autopilot, like my body knew what needed to happen long before my mind caught up. I sat down, opened a blank document, and typed 2 words, "Dear Miles." The rest came out in a rush, not angry, not emotional, just quietly resolute, the way a bridge falls into place when enough weight has pressed on it for too long. I wrote that I was resigning effective 2 weeks from today. I thanked him for the opportunity, even though the word opportunity tasted bitter. I wished the team well. I kept it clean, professional, polite, the kind of letter I would write if I wasn't walking away from 7 years of my life. When I finished, I read it twice, not because I needed to fix it, but because part of me couldn't believe I had actually written it. Then I printed it, placed the page gently on my dining table, and felt a strange stillness wash over me. I realized I wasn't trembling, I wasn't crying, I wasn't scared, I was done, and that was enough. I fell asleep faster than I had in months, the letter resting on my nightstand like a quiet promise. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, 15 minutes ahead of time as always. Not for them, but for me. Habit, I guess. I walked past the break room where 2 analysts pretended not to stare, walked past the cubicles where people whispered as soon as they thought I couldn't hear. Walked straight to Miles's office door, which was already open. He was on a call, pacing, gesturing dramatically like he was giving a TED Talk instead of explaining why he'd lost track of a client contract. He saw me, lifted one finger, and mouthed 1 second like I was an interruption to his brilliance. That tiny gesture, the finger, the dismissiveness, was the last thread holding the old version of me in place. When he finally hung up, he pointed at the chair. "What do you need, Hannah? I'm swamped." I didn't bother sitting. I stepped forward, placed the printed resignation letter in the center of his desk, and waited. It took him a moment to register what he was looking at. His smirk faltered, his eyebrows twitched, his entire expression rearranged itself into something sour. "What is this?" he asked, voice tight. "My resignation," I said plainly. "Effective 2 weeks from today?" He blinked, twice. "You're quitting?" "Yes." "Because of the restructuring?" "Among other things." He leaned back in his chair with a scoff. "You're being dramatic. This makes you look weak, you know that? Running because you don't get your way." I met his eyes without flinching. I'm not running, Miles. I'm leaving. There's a difference. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something cutting, something he'd later pretend was mentorship, but nothing came out. He just sat there, deflated. I turned toward the door. I'll finish my 2 weeks professionally. After that, I'm done. I didn't wait for permission, didn't wait for his reaction. I walked out, past the cubicles, past the whispers, past the people who suddenly seemed very aware of their keyboards. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from release, like my body finally realized the cage door was open. By lunchtime, half the office knew. Some avoided me. Some looked at me with envy. A few, like Elise, pulled me aside with wide eyes and whispered, "Are you really leaving?" I didn't give details. I didn't brag. I just said, it was time. And for once, those words felt like the truest thing I'd ever said. My last day came with no cake, no farewell card, no awkward group photo in the break room. Just silence. Fitting, really. I packed my things slowly, not because I was sentimental, but because I wanted to feel every second of leaving. Walking out of that building felt like stepping out of a storm I didn't realize I'd been living in for years. The next Monday, I walked into NorthBridge, and if my old office felt like a cage, this place felt like oxygen. Glass walls, warm light, a desk that wasn't someone's cast-off, and a team that actually looked up when I entered the room. Serena met me at my door with 2 coffees. "First day," she said, handing me one. "Let's get you set up." There was no checklist shoved into my hands, no expectation that I'd clean up a mess before proving myself. Instead, she introduced me to the team one by one, each interaction grounded, respectful. By the end of the week, I was already reviewing 2 major accounts that someone at my old company had clearly mishandled. When I joined the first client call, the representative, Mara, recognized my name immediately. "Wait," she said, leaning closer to her camera. "You're with NorthBridge now?" "Yes," I said. "Good to see you again." Her shoulders dropped in visible relief. "Thank God. I've been trying to get answers from your old team for weeks. Nothing but delays and excuses." Serena shot me a knowing glance but said nothing. We listened while Mara explained misrouted shipments, missed deadlines, invoices that had been sent twice or not at all. Everything she described was what I used to prevent. I walked her through a solution, step by step, and by the end of the call, she signed a contract with NorthBridge. Not because I asked, because she trusted me. That was how it started, slowly at first. A few messages from former clients. A referral here, a quiet inquiry there. Someone from a mid-sized distribution firm emailed me. "Heard through the grapevine you made a move. Smart." Another message read, "I hope you're still in operations. Our team could use someone who actually listens." None of this felt like revenge. It felt like gravity. People gravitate towards stability. I had been that stability for years while Miles pretended to be the architect behind it all. Without me, the cracks were finally showing. The evidence came sooner than I expected. One day after lunch, my phone rang. It was Jonah, one of the few decent people left at my old office. His voice came out strained, like he was calling from inside a collapsing building. "Hannah, it's bad." "What happened?" "Everything," he said. 3 people quit last week, 2 more this morning. Tyler screwed up a vendor contract so badly the entire Midwest supply line is frozen. Customers are furious. Miles spent an hour yelling about sabotage. "Sabotage?" "Yeah," Jonah said with a humorless laugh. "He thinks you orchestrated the whole thing." I let that sit for a moment. "I trained Tyler for one afternoon, Jonah. That's the last thing I did for that company." "I know," he sighed, "but he's unraveling. No direction, no answers, just chaos." Part of me expected to feel triumphant, like this was poetic justice, but instead I felt something quieter. Confirmation. I hadn't imagined the weight I carried. I hadn't exaggerated the dysfunction. I hadn't been dramatic or sensitive. I'd been right. A week later, Elise called. She didn't bother with small talk. "I'm leaving," she whispered. "I can't work under someone who screams at everyone and then hides in his office." I didn't tell her what to do. I just said, "You deserve better." And she cried, quiet, exhausted tears, because sometimes permission is all people need. Meanwhile, NorthBridge grew. We added 2 new coordinators. We brought on another analytics lead. Serena pulled me into every strategic meeting like I belonged there. And for the first time, I did. Every client I onboarded felt like a doorway opening. Every problem I solved felt like reclaiming something I had lost long before Miles ever pushed that folder across his desk. I didn't need to watch his world collapse to feel vindicated. I just needed to stand in a place where I finally felt seen. The collapse was happening without my involvement. The rise, that was the part I had earned. I didn't expect to see Miles again, not so soon, and definitely not at one of those overpriced industry mixers where everyone pretends they aren't silently judging each other. Serena and I had just finished a pitch when I spotted him across the room. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched, eyes sunken, suit hanging off him like it belonged to someone else. The man who once strutted through hallways as if the world owed him applause now looked like he was trying not to crumble. The moment he saw me, something inside him snapped. He cut through a group of executives mid-conversation, practically stumbling toward me. "Hannah," he hissed, breath sharp, "we need to talk." I didn't flinch. "No," I said quietly, "we don't." His face twisted. "You think this is funny? You think you won?" The desperation in his voice was louder than his words. I kept mine calm. "This was never a game." "You destroyed my company," he snapped, loud enough to silence half the room. Conversation stalled, eyes turned. For a second, the entire mixer held its breath. I tilted my head. "I didn't destroy anything, Miles. I just stopped holding everything together." The hush that followed felt like a door closing. He stared at me, fury draining into something hollow, something defeated. When he finally stepped back, it wasn't because he wanted to. It was because he had nothing left to fight with. Serena touched my arm gently. "You ready to go?" I nodded. More than ready. By the end of that quarter, NorthBridge had doubled its growth. Serena offered me equal partnership. My name went on the letterhead next to hers. And somewhere in the background of my life, Miles's world kept collapsing without me lifting a single finger. Legacy isn't who shouts the loudest when they're on top. It's who's still standing when the noise fades. And I am still standing. When I look back at everything that happened, what stands out isn't the collapse of Miles's company. It's how long I stayed somewhere that refused to see me. My biggest lesson wasn't about revenge, it was about recognition. I spent years telling myself loyalty mattered more than respect, that patience would eventually be rewarded, that being the dependable one was enough. But the truth I finally had to face was this: you can't save a place that's determined to ignore the hands holding it up. I learned that walking away doesn't make you weak. It frees you to rise. And I learned that not every battle needs a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is leave quietly and let people live with the consequences they created. People like Miles don't collapse because you push them. They collapse because the scaffolding they built on other people's labor was never strong in the first place. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. I don't hate him. I don't need to. Life handled what I never had to touch. What matters now is what I built afterward. The peace, the confidence, the validation that came not from revenge, but from finally choosing myself. And for anyone living something similar right now, I want to tell you this. You don't owe lifelong loyalty to places that treat you like you're replaceable. You don't need permission to leave environments that shrink you. And you're not dramatic for expecting respect. You're human. Today's workplaces move fast, change fast, and sometimes break people in the process. Your responsibility is not to keep them running at the cost of your sanity. Your responsibility is to protect the parts of yourself that make you valuable, your clarity, your strength, your voice. How to get started today. Write down 3 things you bring to your job that no one sees. Identify one boundary you've been afraid to set and practice saying it out loud. Reach out to someone who values your work. Connection can be a lifeline. Start updating your resume even if you're not ready to move yet. If this story speaks to what you're going through, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you want more stories like this, share, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.